Imagine you're at work and you get a call from your spouse saying that there is an emergency. It's not just any kind of emergency, though. You immediately feel a pit in your stomach with an inkling of what may have happened when you received the call. Then, after what is only just a few seconds but feels like hours, your spouse says that all five of your kids are hurt. Not one, not two, five. You rush home to find something that your worst nightmares couldn't have even drawn up. Hi, everyone. It's your girl Angel, and this is Borderline Behavior. Today, we have a different guest in the studio to talk about Andrea Yates and the case that shocked America. But very fittingly, it is my spouse, Rye. Go ahead and, introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, I'm Rye, and I'm not a quintuple murderer.
Awesome. Well, that's good to hear at least. It's a bit different from our story. So we'll see how you feel about how this case plays out at the end. But just a warning before we get into everything today. With the case of Andrea Yates, there will be a mix of both confirmed and alleged information. I do say alleged because technically all the things that I'm going to be saying about a certain person will not be or has not been proven in court. And so we will be adding our own thoughts, theories, and opinions throughout the case. Ryan and I will do our best to label each part as a fact, an assumption, or an opinion. Thank you in advance for your understanding. So, to start this story, I think it's only fair to begin with Andrea and her upbringing to get the full background of the sad, sad story that we're going to delve into today. Andrea Yates was raised in Houston, Texas, and she was the youngest in her family with four older siblings. This perfect family ideal played a huge role in her upbringing. She wanted that same traditional Christian family. However, Andrea's life was not exactly perfect, as you may know if you've heard this case before. But see, not many people knew, but Andrea was struggling. She had depression and, for the first time when she was 17, mentioned suicide. Now, Rye, I know we both had very different high school experiences, but what was your kind of experience in high school? What was that like for you?
Well, I went to like a semi-private school, so it was a little weird. I was definitely the new kid. I came from out of state. Nobody knew me. Everybody knew everybody else. So it was definitely hard. It was a new experience, but I don't know if I went as far as being like suicidal about it.
That's very fair. I had a very different time growing up. I was very much either a lot of people liked me or a lot of people hated me. And I was very different. I grew up in a very small Republican town named Martinsville, right in Indiana. If you're from Indiana, you've probably already formed your own opinion on Martinsville, as have I, and it is not a great place. But I do relate to Andrea a lot. Andrea was a high achiever. She participated in sports, and she even made the National Honor Society, which I'm also a member of. However, she was still struggling. She was still upset, and believe it or not, Andrea was considering suicide at the same time that she was earning valedictorian. After she graduated, she went out to nursing school and eventually at her apartment complex, she met Rusty Yates, who on paper was the perfect man for her. Rusty became a computer engineer for NASA. So, absolutely insane. They were both super high achievers and they really liked that about each other. They liked how each of them pushed each other and they liked how they both were always striving for more. Their history of high achievement wasn't the only thing that they shared, though. They both wanted a big ass family. Oh my god. They both wanted a big ass family, like as many kids as you could have. And that's exactly what they went on to do. They had a big, Christian family, and they even named every kid after someone in the Bible. So I don't know, Rye. What are your thoughts on that, just off the rip?
I never want kids, just first off, and I could never imagine having, what we say, 5. Uh,
Yeah.
and then I'm also not a very religious person, obviously, you know that, and just it's a little cliché to name all your kids after people in the Bible, no? I just that irks me the wrong way.
Definitely not in our bingo cards, but I do get being religious. In fact, as a teenager, like as a child, I was very, very into religion. I was ultra Christian to the point that I was literally a missionary myself. I literally traveled telling the word of God. And while I wouldn't exactly say that what I was doing was part of a cult, even though it sometimes felt like it, unfortunately, Andrea did not have the same experience. There's a point where this kind of lifestyle starts to get concerning, and honestly, I think we were there with the Yates family. They didn't wait any time between kids. They were literally just having kids as quickly as they could, or in their words, as God wanted them to. The shortest time that Andrea was pregnant after having her last kid was 6 months, giving her no time to heal or prepare. And the longest time between two kids was 2 years. So, like, they were not playing around. They said that we're going to have as many kids as God lets us, and they just let her rip on that front, I guess. But now, the Yates family obviously were Christians. However, here's where the cult thing kind of comes into play. So, his name is Michael Warnecki. Michael and his wife Rachel were quite interesting people, but let's start out with Michael Warnecki. Michael started claiming that he was a prophet and had seen God. And I'm not talking about just claiming it to his friends and family or to people in a church. Like, he was running up and down the streets saying that he is the next prophet and he saw God. Michael earned a degree in behavioral science at the same time, though. So, what are your feelings about that, Rye, before I comment on that?
You would have to know what you're getting up to. I feel like indoctrination and just learning what makes people tick is a part of those early level classes, like psychology 102 per se. So he knew what he was up to.
I have to agree wholeheartedly. I feel like this is when there's no denying that Michael is a messed up, manipulative person. But Michael starts going up and down the streets screaming that he's a prophet, and he tries getting into seminary school. For those of you who aren't exactly familiar with seminary school, it's pretty much when someone wants to go and become a priest or a preacher. In the army, they have their own seminary school. For those of you who don't know, I'm a veteran. In the army, you become a chaplain and you're skilled in all religions. I don't know if that's the case for regular seminary schools, but Michael had his heart set on becoming a preacher. However, he got rejected. He got rejected by multiple seminary schools multiple times, and it was not looking good for him. But Michael was determined to become a Christian leader. Despite being, quote, too fanatical, end quote, to attend seminary school, Michael eventually ended up getting in. He goes through this school after he's already gotten his behavioral science degree. And Michael doesn't decide to just go preach for a church somewhere. No, instead, Michael decides to become a street preacher. Like, he's on the street yelling at people. Like, the ones on college campuses that scream at you and tell you that abortion is wrong. Or maybe they were standing outside your pride with signs saying that gay is bad and you're going to hell. It was those kind of people that Michael started to associate with. It was the whole nine yards. Michael didn't only start associating with these people, though. Michael starts building a cult with members from across the country, and his beliefs, they are quite insane. We'll get into them, but Michael would spread his beliefs via letters, mail, VHS tapes, cassettes, anything he could. He would send it out to members of his forming cult across an entire nation. Some of his victims of the cult have came forward and explained what Michael's teachings were. You see, Michael was putting that behavioral science degree into overdrive. Michael had these specific ideals that don't really fit traditional Christianity, and he was forcing them on to as many people as he could. First off, like many cults, he believes in doomsday. Doomsday can, somewhat be represented in the Bible based on what you believe in Revelations, but he was taking it to an extreme. Michael starts telling his followers that unfortunately, shit's gonna hit the fan soon. I know you're not very religious, Rye, but you know how typical Christians believe that you repent your sins and you go to heaven?
Yeah, I've definitely heard of that.
Well, that was not the case here with Michael. No, instead, from Michael's point of view, or whether he believed it or not, I guess we can't prove it, but Michael starts preaching that there are only so many spots in heaven, like it's some kind of competition show. And the people of his following actually start believing it. And I mean, from their point of view, I do get it a little bit because, like, yeah, I've been there. Like, I've been a missionary, and like, you just believe what the people tell you and you go with it, and you start spreading the word. So I somewhat get it, especially for someone or a lot of people, I guess, that believe that this was a prophet. Like, why would you disobey a prophet? I don't get it for me nowadays, let's just say that, but I get why someone would fall for it, especially back then. So Michael was so messed up in the head, though, with what he was preaching, and not only that, but he was also extremely misogynistic. Michael would go around telling his followers that how a kid turns out is based solely on the mother. Even if the kids had two parents, a mother and a father, it was solely the mother's fault if the kid turned out badly. And Michael also taught that mothers should beat their children to get the devil out of them. Now, that's a lot to take in, I'm sure, but what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are your thoughts on what Michael was teaching to his, I'm not even going to call them followers, I'm going to say victims.
Yeah, victims is a good word. Misogyny is a wonderful start to it all, if you can't hear my sarcasm. Just to put it all on the woman because he isn't a woman, so it can't be his fault, is just step one to making sure he can never get blamed for anything.
Exactly. And mothers, in Michael's eyes, had to save their children by the age of 12. So if mothers failed and their kids hit 13 and they still weren't perfect in the eyes of God, or should we say in the eyes of Michael, then the mother and her child would be going to hell. So, this was a type of propaganda that Andrea was under. She was being force fed this ideology that she was the sole person responsible for her kids. And if they turned out badly, then it was fully her fault. Rusty and Andrea also fully believed Michael and Rachel were Neki and everything that Michael was preaching that we know of. They even traveled around the country in a van together, which might be crazy to some people, but Rusty met Michael in college and they were pretty good friends. And the closer they got, they stayed friends. And when Rusty met Andrea and Michael met Rachel, Rusty and Andrea Yates actually decided to buy an RV and they transported the. Rusty and Andrea Yates actually bought an RV and they fully customized the inside to be perfect for traveling and practically donated the RV to Michael and Rachel so all four of them could travel the country together and spread the word of God through Michael's preachings. So to say that they were under the influence is literally an understatement because they quite literally traveled the entire country together. As time went on, Rusty ended up not listening to the Warnecki's preachings much anymore, but Amanda never stopped. And in fact, she ramped up, and it got so bad that she was practically living in daily religious delusion. Now, Andrea was a good mother. She was the type of mother that would make homemade cakes for her kids based on whatever they wanted. She'd play with all of her children and she would just have the best time with them. And up until her literal last baby, she had all boys. She would get down and dirty with them and roughhouse with them. And everyone viewed Andrea as a great mom. Not a single person that you could have asked back then would have said that Andrea was a bad mom, unless you asked the Warneckis. Until the time Andrea was between having her third or fourth child, she became a completely different person. She just wasn't bubbly anymore like she used to be. She wouldn't talk openly like she used to. And honestly, most of the time, she would just stare. She would stare off at the wall or stare off into the distance, and nobody could bring her back to. Andrea started showing signs of severe psychosis, and she actually tried attempting suicide. After this, she went to the hospital, and the doctor said that Andrea was one of the top 5 sickest patients that he had ever encountered. And I just want to highlight how absolutely insane that is because I worked at a psych hospital for 3 years and I worked in intake, and we would see, anywhere from 5 to 20 patients on a given day. For this psych doctor to say that Andrea was in the top 5 sickest patients he'd ever seen, I mean, it's just insane. Eventually, Andrea gets released from the hospital, and not even a month later, she was begging her husband, Rusty, to just let her end her life with a knife to her neck. So naturally, she went back to the hospital and she told the psychiatrist that she met with that she was dealing with both auditory and visual hallucinations. She may not have used those actual words, but it was very true. She started seeing things and hearing things, and she shared this with the doctor. And when the doctor received all of that information, he confidently diagnosed her with both postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis. Immediately, Andrea had to start taking an antipsychotic, Haldol, and an antidepressant as well every single day. And I mean, I am someone who is a big medicine proponent. I take medicine every day and I literally would be crazy without it. Rye, I know you just started taking medicine daily. How are you feeling about that and that journey?
Yeah, it's definitely a new thing for me. I've never even really been one to take some Tylenol when I'm not feeling too great. So taking medicine daily is a very new adventure. And if I miss a day or don't feel like taking it someday, I can tell something's a bit off. Like I feel different and I can really notice it like every single time.
Definitely. I'm the same way. And honestly, Andrea was pretty close to that too. She could tell immediately once she started taking it that she was feeling a lot better. She got to a point where honestly she thought, well, I'm doing so well, I don't need this medicine anymore. I think this is more common on people who start taking medicine and aren't used to having to be on it for like the rest of your life. But the doctor told both Rusty and Andrea that they couldn't have any more children because Andrea would be likely to have another psychotic break. But since she felt better, Andrea stopped taking her medicine. And right, it was literally 7 weeks, less than 2 months before she was Less than 2 months after she was discharged from the hospital, Rusty and Andrea found out that Andrea was pregnant again.
Right back to it.
Yup, and Andrea went right back to psychosis as well. Andrea started acting catatonic at some points, staring off and not being able to be brought back to. But then other times she would be schizophrenically reading her Bible. She was discharged from the hospital again, and now she had a new warning attached to her. Andrea could never be alone, and she could certainly never be alone with the kids. So after having their fourth kid, Rusty was pretty sure that Andrea would be, quote, fine, and she would just go back on the medicine after their fifth child. Rusty claims that he had no idea what psychosis meant, and he also said that he had no clue that Andrea was so infatuated with the Warnecki's cult. I have a lot of feelings about this. We'll get to the Warnecki's cult thing a bit later, but Rye, you know pretty well that when you get a new diagnosis like that or have something mental health related going on, they sit you down and they explain it. And especially with something as bad as postpartum psychosis, they don't just say, hey, you have postpartum psychosis and leave. So I really struggle to believe that Rusty's like, oh, yeah, didn't know what it meant. That's crazy. Can't relate. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's hard to understand how, like, I guess it could be twofold. The doctors could have been a little relaxed, we'll say, with their explanation and things because he is educated. So he could have slyly or otherwise misinformed the doctors, being like, oh, yes, I understand. I'll make sure it gets taken care of, and kind of brushed it off. But at the same time, it's just hard to see anything else being true. Like, I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't have understood what any of this meant.
Yeah, I completely agree. And Andrea, after this, was just feeling so defeated. And, another sign that she was still obsessed with the Warnecki's cult. Andrea reached out to her dear friend Rachel. Rachel Warnecki replied a few days later, telling Andrea that she's absolutely wicked and she has to fix herself and her children so that they could all go to heaven. Remember that Michael preached that if the children weren't godly enough by age 12, then it was the mother's fault and the kids would ever be able to go to heaven. And poor Andrea, less than 3 months later, after receiving that note from Rachel, she did something that she could never take back. One day, Andrea filled up the tub and she was asked why. And Andrea said, quote, she might need it, end quote. She was hospitalized for being suicidal, but then she even told the doctors that she had planned to drown all five of her children, but then decided not to. So she started seeing a new doctor. It's not really sure why she switched doctors. Maybe it was just like a new ER doc that saw her and she stuck with it. But this new doctor decided to wean Andrea off the antipsychotic medication, Haldol, that she was on. Haldol is not just something that you should stop unless like you've underwent severe recovery, and Andrea was nowhere near that. 2 days after being weaned off Haldol, Andrea did the absolute unthinkable. Rusty left for work, and Rusty's mother was supposed to come there just an hour later. But if you remember, Andrea was never supposed to be left alone with the kids, and this morning she was. It's unclear as to why, whether Rusty's mother just couldn't get there in time or what happened. But within that hour, Andrea filled up the bathtub and drowned all five of her children, ranging from 6 months to 7 years old. Andrea drowned her poor children one by one and then laid them on her and Rusty's bed. Andrea thought that if she killed her children while they were so young, then maybe they could still make it to heaven. So, this is a direct correlation between what she thought and Michael Warnecki's teachings from what we know. They line up literally perfectly. Obviously, this case went nationwide and people were so upset. But at the same time, they had no idea about the cult, the mental health struggles that Andrew was going through and had been going through. They didn't really know anything about the case other than the fact that 5 children were now dead. And of course, the public pushed for the death penalty for poor Andrea. Rusty stood by Andrea's side the entire time throughout the trial, and even now, Rusty still defends his ex wife and says how amazing of a mother she was to their children. In the first case, Andrea's team was trying to plead insanity, and for those of you who are familiar with true crime, you know how hard insanity can be to prove. The prosecutor's side claimed that a loving mother, no matter what her mental health state, would never kill her children off one by one. I'm just gonna straight up call bullshit on that. Like, honestly, tell me you've never seen psychosis without telling me you've never seen someone in psychosis. Because I've been in psychosis and I've also seen people in psychosis. And I could tell you the last thing on your mind is anything rational. You are not thinking about anything in this world. Like, you are living in a different timeline. It's just not the same. And for those of you who have never experienced that, I hope you never do. But for those of you that had, I think you'll agree that you're fully not in control of your actions under such circumstances. Luckily, at about the same time as the trial, the Warneckis started to become under fire. One of Michael's victims made it out of the cult and made a website to connect other victims that had been through the Warneckis' teachings. These victims started connecting the dots and also were hearing about Andrea Yates' case at the same time. So they start supporting Andrea and they're like, hey, we went through religious psychosis too. We were completely delusional and it's all because of the Warneckis. At the end of the trial, though, Andrea was found guilty and she wasn't given this death sentence, but she was sentenced to life in prison. However, there was a big issue in that first case. Now, Rye, you know how obsessed I am over Criminal Minds and how many episodes there are, yeah.
Oh, yes. Too many episodes.
Well, I don't think so. But anyway, the same could be said for Law and Order. Law and Order has many different spin off shows, and there's a lot that goes into Law and Order. But funnily enough, a Law and Order episode was actually referenced in this first trial. It was actually said that Andrea was watching a Law and Order episode where a mother killed her children and then got off scot free due to postpartum depression and psychosis. The expert witness claimed that Andrea had seen this episode and got the idea to plead insanity based off of that. And we know that during that first case, she was sentenced to life in prison. However, get this, the episode quite literally didn't exist. Like, there isn't an episode of Law and Order where there was anything remotely close to that. So the expert witness who had went up there literally lied just to get her prosecuted. And so because of this, he got in trouble and the case was overturned and she got to go to her second trial. And this time around, the Warnecki's influence on her was finally taken into account because they found things from Michael and Rachel Warnecki all over Andrea's house. They found the letter from Rachel. They found little knickknacks here and there, letters from Michael, VHS tapes, preachings. In fact, there was even a cassette of Michael preaching in their cassette player on the day that Andrea killed her kids. So that means that either the day of or the day before, Andrea had been listening to Michael preaching and then, decided to go ahead with killing her kids. She may have been in a psychotic state, but she still was under the influence of Michael and his teachings. This time around, in case number two, though, Andrea was sentenced to be set in a psych ward indefinitely. Andrea's never asked to leave the facility, and she's been doing a lot better for herself. Andrea makes arts and crafts now and donates them to children's charities. And her husband, Rusty, was visiting her twice a week when they were together. And then after they divorced, he claimed that he needed to move on with his life, but he still called her once a month. And they would talk about what their kids might be like if they were still here today. Even though they got divorced, though, Rusty still has never once ever blamed Andrea, even when all of America did. So, with all of that in mind, Rye, kind of what are your thoughts on the case and who would you say is to blame?
It's a little tough because at the end of the day, she did do the deed. She did kill the 5 children, but that's not entirely her fault because she was, I guess, for lack of a better term, brainwashed um, by him, by her husband. So I think he's probably more to blame, but at the end of the day, she still did it. So there's some accountability there, but it just doesn't feel right to say that.
I definitely agree that Andrea was brainwashed by Michael Warnecki and Rachel. And I also feel that Rusty is to blame for a lot of this because there's no way that the doctors didn't explain the seriousness of Andrea to him. And he just thought, wow, she looks better on this medication. Like, we could take her off and we could keep having kids again because that's what God would want. But it's funny how God never talks about medication or anything like that, like clearly Andrea needed that medication. She was doing better on it, and I just feel that this all could have been different if Rusty would have listened to the warning signs. Rusty knew that Andrea was never supposed to be left alone with the kids, but instead he still left an hour period where his mom could not be there and Andrea was unattended. So, I mean, what did he expect to happen? I know that he says he never thought Andrea would do anything like this, but she did. And I'm not saying it's her fault. I do believe she was fully in psychosis and not in charge of her actions, but nevertheless, it happened, and I do think he's partly to blame. And I think Michael and Rachel Warnecki have a large part in this as well. Funnily enough, one of my favorite content creators, Brianna Heim, said that her favorite show is Desperate Housewives. And on the video she made of this, she actually included a clip of Desperate Housewives creator talking about that, talking about how the show is actually based off this trial and the crazy things that women have to go through. And then Desperate Housewives itself actually inspired Pretty Little Liars and the Real Housewives TV reality show franchise. So all of these shows came and stemmed from this trial, which I think is super crazy. But all in all, I stand by Andrea. I'm happy she's doing better now. I know she realizes the gravity of what she did now. And I just wish her the best. I can't imagine the guilt and sadness that she feels. And no matter what, I still don't think she is to blame for the death of her 5 children. So I know this was a crazy episode. I really want to hear what all of your thoughts are. I think that there might be some like split opinions on this. I'm interested to see what you guys have to say. So comment what you guys think about this case and let me know what your thoughts are. Also comment if there's any cases that you want to see me cover old or new. I have my next one lined up, but after that, it's kind of free game. So I'd love to hear what you guys would like me to cover. And I'm super excited to keep making podcast episodes and sharing with all of you. So I think that's it for this week. Thank you, Rye, for being here with me. And thank you all for listening. Bye, guys.
Bye.